Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Jay with the MMA Guys. First of all, I want to thank all of you who have continued to subscribe and tune in for our fight companions and our predictions and have shared and commented and done all that awesome stuff. We took a little bit of a break this week, and I'm sure you may have either missed or got a little bit of relief from all the notifications that come up. I know me personally, I'm getting notifications all day, every day from all the YouTube channels that I'm subscribed to. So we didn't want to bombard you with a lot of material unless we had something good coming out. Another reason we took a little bit of a break this week is I just fought this past Saturday, won my 4th kickboxing match, my 5th in total. So I'm currently 4-1 in full contact kickboxing. And even better than that, we had our very own Ray G, Arms himself, cornering me. And we've got a really awesome tape of that about to come out soon. It's actually getting mastered right now. So again, thank you guys that have tuned in. Please continue to comment and let us know what you would like to see from the MMA guys, what type of stuff would make our show better, and any recommendations that you might have are welcome, because we only do this because it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm ready. It's fun for us, and it's brought a lot of joy to our lives, and actually Ray's going his way here right now. So shoot him a congratulations on our victory, and I will be putting more of this stuff out as we go along. So I'm going to pause real quick here, get Ray here to sit down. What's going on, man?
Don't even pause, I just segue right in.
Actually, shit, I wasn't even recording that, but at least I had the hi-fi on.
Okay.
Here, let's see here. We're going now?
Yeah.
Check, check, check. Okay, yeah, there we go, man. All right, buddy, I got you all set up.
Cool.
And check the lighting here and everything, man. I was just telling him about your fighter winning.
You only throw a dip in.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
It'll be like my signature thing.
Can I use your phone to Wikipedia Barboza or
I'll do it.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. We can all right, so let's you want to do like a little recap real quick? Some of the stuff that happened this past weekend. Anthony Pettis popped a rib fighting
Rafael dos Anjos? Oh, Dustin Poirier.
Yeah. Apparently some of the best jiu-jitsu in MMA for a main event, any event, all weekend. What do you think of Poirier pulling that victory out over Pettis?
Dustin Poirier got a little bit of fan notoriety when he fought the likes of Conor McGregor a couple of years back. Dustin Poirier is one of those names that anybody who's deep into the game is going to know Dustin Poirier, very much a la Cub Swanson. You know, guys are somewhere in between journeyman and superstar. Anthony Pettis has not been the same since he graced the cover of the Wheaties box. I think he lost his title to Rafael dos Anjos. Did he lose to Ben? No, he choked out. He tapped out Benson Henderson, and then he lost 2 more fights. He lost one to Eddie Alvarez, correct?
Yeah, I can always check this too later on, but
okay.
Look it up too. I mean, we got time.
Well, the thing with I'm telling you right now, Anthony Pettis has tried to go between 155 and 145. He's still with Rufus Sport. They've put out fighters the likes of Tyron Woodley. I tell you what, man, I've never seen a guy take this long of a break from success in the UFC, other than the likes of, let's say, a Robbie Lawler, who was able to find a resurgence. And Pettis was so reliant upon speed, acrobats, agility, the ability to cover distance in a quick period of time. It's not like he's a really high IQ fighter. He's a super athlete who just moves at the speed of light. I think that we've seen the best that we're ever going to see from the likes of Anthony Pettis. Showtime, his little brother's also having a little bit of a tough time right now in the UFC. Sergio Pettis, who's he's a feather 25, or why can't I think of the flyweight? I apologize, fight fans. Go ahead, shit on me in the comments. It's cool. What I am going to say is that Dustin Poirier is a kid that still seems to be hungry. He still seems to be improving, and he's one of those guys where I actually think that he has his sights set on the belt. He doesn't have his sights set on. We don't hear about him talking about contract negotiations. We don't hear him talking about, selling more pay-per-views, and we don't see him trying to get endorsement deals or market himself outside of the cage. The kid seems to be a bored, tested, and true fighter. I do think that he's a little bit linear for that weight class. I would like to see a little bit more creativity from him in the striking department. But a victory over Anthony Pettis, nonetheless, is an absolutely monumental victory for him, even though it might not be the Anthony Pettis that it was of 2014.
Also, Sage Northcutt beat his losing streak that night at UFC Norfolk as well. He beat, I can't recall off the top of my head, point of decision.
I don't want to say how old Sage Northcutt is yet. I think he might be 20. Sage Northcutt with the wins over Michael Quiones this weekend. I'm hoping I pronounced that right. If I didn't, please don't beat me up in the comments. I appreciate all the positive comments, all the negative ones. If we get enough fans, perhaps I'll do something similar to a mean tweet segment on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. I think a couple of them had to do with the MMA guys, more like the moderately interested guys. That was a very positive one, so if that was you, that's great. Zine Kong, we appreciate you. Shark Teeth, Amanda, some of our loyal tribe. We definitely do it for you. And the negative ones, I tell you what, the more you guys comment, the more you watch. My pockets were lined with $12.74 this week. If I can increase that by a little bit, I can actually go to Applebee's and get a lunch special with a beverage. So keep on throwing the shade.
All right, so the next thing, too, is that in January of next year, Scott Coker of Bellator has slated a Grand Prix involving
Fedor, Matt Mitrione, Ryan Bader, King Mo Lual, not Czech Congo, Chael Sonnen, maybe Wanderlei. Fedor Emelianenko. Don't chew tobacco, kids. It's bad. So the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix, I think Scott Coker was still at the helm when Strikeforce tried this. This is back when Daniel Cormier was the heavyweight champ of Strikeforce. He beat... I think he beat Ben Rothwell. They were trying to get a fight for him against Frank Mir, but he beat the likes of maybe it was Ben Rothwell. But either way, there isn't a lot of interest. Without knowing how the Grand Prix is going to play out, if it's Matt Mitrione versus King Mo Lual, outside of the world of legitimate MMA fans, nobody's going to find anything interesting. So what I would like to see Scott Coker do is perhaps do something similar to the UFC Countdown and maybe find a way for us to generate interest in these fighters outside of the cage. You know, Chael Sonnen's the only guy there that's super marketable. Matt Mitrione, meathead from the UFC, big personality, super athletic guy for 260 pounds, played for the New York Giants for a hot minute, really big mouthpiece. He's a great face and a great voice for the sport. I think that the best thing that could possibly happen for the Bellator Grand Prix of heavyweight fighting is going to be Matt Mitrione versus Chael Sonnen. And in that case, Chael Sonnen does not stand a chance against the likes of somebody that big. We watched what happened when Chael Sonnen fought Rashad, and Rashad is not anywhere near the size of a fighter that Matt Mitrione is. But you know what? Scott Coker has proven time and time again he can bring success to any organization. There's a reason that Dana White, when he bought out Strikeforce, there was a no-compete clause in there that Scott Coker was not allowed to promote. Once they got it away from Bjorn Rebney, Bellator seems to be on the uprise. They've produced the likes of a Michael Venom Page. They've been able to bring over a Rory McDonald and a Gegard Mousasi, a Matt Mitrione, a Chael Sonnen, and a Wanderlei Silva. What he's doing right now is he's bringing over names that the casual MMA fans recognize. So what's going to happen is they're going to watch something on Viacom, on Spike TV, and if he can generate consistent viewership, they're going to be able to promote some of their other fighters on the undercard and perhaps generate a couple of stars. I'm not quite sure that they're in the running right now to compete with the UFC, but I do think that if Bellator continues on the track that they're on, the UFC rode the likes of a Chuck Liddell into the ground. They rode the likes of Tito Ortiz into the ground. People need to buy into the fighters to buy into the organization, and right now what Scott Coker's doing, and I think that it's a very intelligent approach to this situation, is he's bringing over name recognition. He's probably overpaying a little bit, but in the long game, I think this is going to be the best thing, and I do think that Bellator, if I had to put a time frame on it, I'm probably going to say 2 to 4 years. We're going to see the passing of the guard. We're going to see Conor kind of move, out of the limelight. After Conor, I don't know if there are any legitimate stars in the UFC right now. Rose Namajunas, a beautiful girl with a shaved head and a boyfriend that is just a staple in mixed martial arts, Pat Barry. But how much interest can a 115-pound female really generate and carry a company? When Conor hangs up those gloves, I don't see an heir apparent that the UFC has. Ronda is doing what Ronda does. Eddie Alvarez, one of my favorite fighters in the world, just isn't going to draw a pay-per-view. So there's going to be a void. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if somebody from Bellator, especially with Viacom money behind them, are able to push their organization to the next level and compete with the UFC. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if we eventually saw a crossover night where the best of the UFC actually compete against the best of Bellator. And I think that's going to be a monumental moment for the sport. So when you see in boxing, we unify 2 titles from 2 different organizations, if we're able to put the likes of a Michael Venom Page versus whoever is the commensurate champion in the UFC at that point, I know Dana and IMG are kind of stingy with their money, but I also know that Scott Coker's a businessman and he's able to get things done just as Dana does. So I'm looking in the future, perhaps we're going to look at MMA more than we look at the UFC, but I still think that the UFC has a stranglehold on the market for the foreseeable future.
Okay, so moving right along, we've got here Michael Bisping, coming off his loss against GSP in just a matter of weeks, has taken a fight against Kevin Gastelum on short notice because Gastelum's opponent, who's Gastelum slated to fight?
I think he was slated to fight Anderson Silva.
You're right.
Okay.
He was slated to fight Anderson Silva, and Bisping Instagram's out. Why not? So now we have Bisping versus Gastelum coming up here this weekend.
Michael Bisping, I read this somewhere, so this is not my original thought, but I thought it was a great dynamic in that Bisping went from journeyman to company man, staple company man to champion, and immediately back to company man. He could have faded into the sunset, into obscurity, but instead, he's a guy that loves to fight. I was happy to see him hold gold around his waist for a little bit. He's been around the UFC for a long time. Kelvin Gastelum is a guy that at 170 pounds looked like a world beater, had a couple of issues with the scales, very similar to Mr. Johnny Hendricks. When he was able to dismantle Tim Kennedy, that was something I did not see coming. Tim Kennedy's a guy with a gas tank for days, and Kelvin Gastelum made him look somewhat pedestrian, and we saw what Tim Kennedy was able to do to Michael Bisping, if you remember that fight from, might have been 2014. Tim Kennedy with jiu-jitsu was able to effectively dominate Michael Bisping. In this fight, I do think it's going to take place on the feet. I think Michael Bisping's able to strike from range as good as anybody. George St. Pierre had a little bit of success with the jab before he was able, with a stranglehold, to dismantle Michael Bisping. I don't think this is a gimme fight for Bisping. I do think it's a winnable fight for Michael at this point. Gun to my head, if I have to pick a winner right now, I'm going to go with Bisping just over his body of work. But Kelvin Gastelum, with his boxing on the inside, I do think he has better boxing than GSP. I do think he has better boxing than Luke Rockhold. But he doesn't have the jiu-jitsu the likes of a Luke Rockhold or a Tim Kennedy. I'm going to look for a slightly oversized Michael Bisping to be able to outstrike Kelvin Gastelum. And we don't always see the most motivated Kelvin Gastelum show up. So my hat's off to you, Mr. Bisping. You've been around since the beginning. I did a little shout out the last one, you know, when as soon as Frankie Edgar hangs it up, the California kid passed his gloves on earlier this year, Mark Munoz. We're going to miss Mr. Bisping. We're going to miss Michael a lot. You know, he was one of those guys that made the UFC what it is, and for that, we should be eternally grateful. I hope that he goes out on top, too. Who knows? He might have 4 fights left in him. He was just a middleweight champion of the world.
Yeah. Okay.
But you do have a murderer's row on deck right there with Jacare, Ronaldo Souza. You have Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold. And you also have Chris Weidman in the shadows, and we don't know what kind of Chris Weidman's going to show up. And he just had a lackluster win over Kelvin Gastelum a couple of months back. So
we have Robert Whitaker in there too. My thought, just throwing this out there, is Bisping is a little bit older. Kevin Gastelum hits harder. I think that he's going to knock out Bisping in the third. I'd say third round KO.
you say third round KO by Kelvin Gastelum?
Kevin Gastelum by knockout.
Kelvin Gastelum.
Kelvin Gastelum. That's what I said, Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum, third round knockout. He's hungry. I think Michael Bisping's got about 2 more fights in him.
Michael Bisping might hang him up after this one, and if he knocks him out in spectacular fashion, you might be able to actually promote a fight with him and GSP. Again, run it back. Who knows? I think the best thing right now for the UFC would be if GSP is able to take on Tyron Woodley, and I know that they've announced that he's probably going to try to defend the 185-pound belt. That's not set in stone. Nobody knows yet. If something happens that he's able to fight Tyron Woodley and defeat the likes of a Tyron Woodley, and Conor McGregor is able to take on Tony Ferguson, El Kukui, and then even though he is not the 145-pound champion, everyone knows that he's never been beat at 145 pounds. He was beat at 170 by Nate Diaz. If you're able to have Conor versus GSP for 3 but 4 theoretical belts, wow.
Dude.
And then look for him to complete the trilogy with Nate and then, say goodbye. But Conor's also talking about boxing Paul Malignaggi, so I don't know. Conor seems to be calling the shots at this moment. So we have the likes of Eddie Alvarez versus Justin Gaethje for the Ultimate Fighter finale. Very much like Eddie Alvarez. When Eddie Alvarez came over to the UFC, I think his first fight was against Donald Cerrone. He had a belt in Dream. He had a belt in Bellator. He had a couple of great fights with Michael Chandler. But as far as the casual fan is concerned, we never saw him against the cream of the crop in the UFC. I just pulled up Justin Gaethje, and outside of Michael Johnson, who he beat back in July of this year, the other notable fights he has is a win over Melvin Guillard in 2014, who was a dominant fighter, had about 70 MMA fights, but a couple of outside issues were giving him... We never got a chance to see the best Melvin Guillard that we could have possibly seen. The Melvin Guillard who was a world beater, who was training at Jackson's MMA. So I can't say anything with a... There's another kid by the name of Bibiano Fernandez. He's a featherweight fighter, and he's been beating the world, but we never got to see him fight a Demetrius Johnson. We never got to see him fight an Ian McCall or a Sergio Pettis. So fighting's different. Like a pitcher, when he throws a fastball, 98 miles an hour moving off the outside of the plate, you can it's going to translate the same from AA to Major League Baseball. With fighting, unless someone has a dance partner of commensurate experience and commensurate skill, it's real easy to look like a world beater when you're fighting in feeder promotions. Almost everyone in the UFC held gold before they got to the UFC. Obviously, there's guys that aren't, but Ring of Combat, CFFC, Legacy Fighting Championships, almost everyone we have come to the UFC, like they'll win a belt and either move to the UFC, defend it once or twice, and come to the UFC and see what the chops are made of. That's where champions meet champions. So with Eddie Alvarez versus Justin Gaethje, the last Eddie Alvarez that we saw, who was his last fight? I think he fought since Conor McGregor. For some reason, that stands out in my mind. I've been so caught up in boxing and kickboxing, world jiu-jitsu trials. Let's look at Eddie Alvarez. You could be right. No contest versus Dustin Poirier. Okay. That was a weird one. Eddie Alvarez was out on his feet in that. All right, now I remember watching that fight. Eddie Alvarez was on Queer Street. He was walking on borrowed legs, and he wound up turning the tides, and he got the best in an old-fashioned slobber knocker against Dustin. We might have watched that one together.
We did.
Okay.
Was that the one? What UFC was that?
That was UFC 211, which was Stipe and Jr. and Joanna and Jessica Aguilar.
I remember that. Dr. Tron was there.
That is correct. Dr. Tron was there. He was putting his dick in the mashed potatoes. All right, so Justin Gaethje moves well. He beat a guy named Nick Newell, who's a one-handed fighter from World Series of Fighting. I was a big fan of. You ever see him? He won the, I think it was a 155-pound belt at the time. I'm going to have to go with Eddie Alvarez just because we've seen him fight the likes of Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Showtime Pettis, Rafael dos Anjos, Donald Cerrone. We know what Eddie Alvarez is capable of. Justin Gaethje might come in and shock the world and, win one versus Eddie. I don't know if he has the name power or the star power yet to really demand a title shot at 155 pounds. There's Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's fighting Edson Barboza. We're going to tackle that one next. I'm going to go with Eddie Alvarez, and I'm going to go with Eddie Alvarez by attrition. Just, his cardio is unbelievable. I'm going to look for him to push a pace, try to score a couple of takedowns. And, when Eddie Alvarez hits you, he hits you.
At this point, though, the slobber knocker with Michael Johnson was so hard. He tried to climb the cage twice and then fall.
Michael Johnson's another guy, man. Michael Johnson's fucking solid, man. But outside, you ask anyone who's Michael the Menace Johnson, outside, Nate Diaz had probably one of his best victories we've ever seen over the likes of Michael Johnson, and that's what lent itself to getting him the crack at Conor when Rafael dos Anjos pulled out. You remember that? He boxed up Michael Johnson.
Okay, I didn't know.
Let me just double check that one to make sure it's...
You're in the captain's chair, buddy.
I am in the captain's chair. With Dustin Poirier?
Yeah.
Oh, that's when Dustin Poirier got the bet. There was an exchange. Both guys cracked each other hard. Dustin Poirier looked like he had Eddie out, and then Eddie was able to turn the tide. And then when he hit him up against the cage, he landed an illegal knee.
I remember that now.
Dustin Poirier, it was in that weird in-between time of 3 points of contact on the mat versus 2 points of contact, and it happened in real time. It was a no contest. I guess they decided against running it back, which is okay. But yeah, I got Eddie Alvarez just because I don't know what Justin Gaethje is capable of. He looked great in World Series of Fighting. So
You're saying 15-0 against, what is Gaethje? Like, I think he's 14-0.
Is he?
He's undefeated, I know that. But you're saying
He's 18-0.
he's 18-0. But like you were saying, use this analogy, an undefeated record from New York City is different from an undefeated record from Washington State.
Correct.
Because who are you fighting there?
Right. If you're going to sit atop the UFC, top 4, guys are going to trade positions. It's just going to happen. Luke Rockhold lost to Michael Bisping. That shouldn't happen, but it does when you're fighting.
He's filming Triple X.
Right. So.
But take nothing away from Gaethje. He's got some of the best leg kicking in the game. Obviously, he's got the heart of a lion. Solid chin.
Good luck against Edson Barboza. I think he would beg to disagree.
I'm not saying against Edson Barboza. I'm saying
Edson Barboza's ended, I think, 2 fights due to leg kicks. And that's also a post-USADA Gilbert Melendez.
okay.
And I have no dog in the fight. I have no idea what Gilbert was doing, but rumors were shared, so I'm just reporting on, what was reported.
We saw some nasty. I've seen if you look at some highlights from Justin Gaethje, he's got some amazing leg kicks.
Yes, he does.
So but Eddie Alvarez.
He's also got an interesting vision problem. You ever see the glasses he wears?
No.
Yeah, he's got some issues with his vision.
Might have more of an issue after fighting Eddie Alvarez. We don't know, man. I think that the problem with a lot of people just only know Eddie Alvarez from getting knocked out by Conor McGregor, and they don't realize just the wars that man has fought, the veteran status of somebody like him. Okay, so anything else you want to add, or do you want to do Khabib Barboza?
We already did Khabib Barboza. Those were good. Those came out solid.
Okay, those were good. What is Chris Cyborg versus Holly Holm is going to be headlining UFC 218. What are your thoughts on that?
Chris Cyborg versus Holly Holm. Holly Holm, when she's spry on her feet, when she's moving around, when she's hopping around the cage, cutting off angles, she's a precision striker. Again, we were all under the impression that Ronda was a world-class boxer, and, that was kind of found out to maybe not be the most true thing in the world. Chris Cyborg is, she's someone that can just impose her will. I can't even think of anybody else to compare her to. She's a tornado. She reminds me a little bit of Wanderlei Silva back in the Pride days. She's just going to walk down there with her head down and throw punches and kicks until someone falls. I don't love Holly Holm's chances in this fight. Chris Cyborg is a big, imposing, physical specimen with knockout power. Knockout power I don't think we've seen from any women. Even, who's the humongous girl? Not Gabriel Gonzaga. I was about to say Gabriel Gonzaga. Gabby Garza. Are they really?
Yeah.
Can you imagine the children that they would have? Jesus Christ. Look like Harry and the Hendersons. Yeah, I think that if they're going to stand there and kickbox and trade, I don't think that it's going to end well for Holly if they trade. I do think Holly cuts off angles a little bit better. I think that Holly's a little bit better at...
I rewatched the Ronda fight, and that's exactly what won it for her, was she did not tie up.
No, she was in, she was out, she was in, she was out. She covered distance quick. She lands combinations as effectively as any female striker we've ever seen. But Cyborg Santos, she's an animal. She's a force of nature. When she hits you, you go to sleep.
Is there going to be anybody left to fight her? We talk about the changing of the guard. Is there going to be anybody left to fight?
There's always somebody lurking in the wind. There's going to be some girl out there right now doing CrossFit and taking Muay Thai. She's 19 years old. She's probably like 160 pounds, just brick solid, 5'11". And she's going to come up. And the world of sports is self-correcting. Ever since Michael Jordan leaves, and they're like, what's going to happen? And then we get Colby, and then we get LeBron, and the day will come. Ken Griffey Jr. left, and we got Derek Jeter and A-Rod and Giancarlo Stanton and all these fellas. It's going to happen. What I'm saying is at this moment right now, there's no apparent to Conor McGregor. There is no superstar in the UFC. But you got to realize, too, Conor fought Diego Brandao. He fought Dennis Seaver. He fought Max Holloway before Max Holloway was, a name. So it took time for the UFC to build Conor. And he was a 2-belt champion over in Cage Warriors, I think. Was it Cage Warriors or Cage Masters? Yeah, Cage Warriors in the UK. So that's what I'm saying. It takes time to build a star. And there are times where we have George St. Pierre and Ronda and John Jones and Anderson Silva. And it's great. Right now, it's feast or famine. Right now, outside of Conor, we really don't have anybody that's, going to demand the massive sale of pay-per-view fights. But I think that we are at a spot right now in mixed martial arts where we have such a dedicated fan base that have probably been on the underground, and they're not just a casual fan. I think we have a big enough solid fan base where the UFC is going to be fine. we're just not going to see, 2 million, 3 million pay-per-view buys. Anything cool happened this week?
Can you address why Colby Covington decided to attack Werdum's boomerang with his neck at the airport?
I didn't. I got to be honest, fight fans. I didn't actually see the video, but I did see Colby Covington go live when he had a little bit of an interaction with Fabrizio Werdum. Fabrizio Werdum, I can't remember but he had another run-in with a smaller fighter. I remember when Michael Bisping had a run-in with Joe Benavidez.
Tony Ferguson was the one to sit down before.
It was Tony Ferguson and Fabrizio Werdum. It's funny, nobody likes a bully, and in the UFC, these guys are the toughest people in the world, but when we see a bigger guy talk shit to a smaller guy, it's like we still revert back to that, like, you're a bully mentality. Michael Bisping's probably 206 pounds right now. Joe Benavidez, who's a fucking stud, is probably 138. And we didn't like that, but, they squashed it, they had fun. Fabrizio Werdum and Tony Ferguson, El Kukui, they had a beef. This time we saw Colby Covington actually kind of, harassing Fabrizio Werdum, Mr. Meme Face.
After TKOing Damian Maia,
correct,
Brazilian national treasure at a sold-out arena in Brazil.
Correct. I think that a lot of this all has an angle. I think Colby Covington, kind of like Mike Perry, guys are realizing that if they're going to want to build value in their brand, they gotta get some notoriety on Twitter, they got to get some notoriety on Instagram, and nothing sells fights quite like controversy. When John Jones came back from that suspension, he was bigger than ever. When GSP came after 4 years of being abducted by aliens, he's bigger than ever. When Ronda Rousey came back and fought the likes of the Brazilian hurricane known as Amanda Nunes, fighters, we like these outside forces that, somehow make their way into the world of our sports. And this can't happen in football because there's 53 guys that dress. It can't happen in baseball because there's 9 guys in the field. But in a fight, there's only one athlete. Take a look at Tiger Woods when he came back from his controversial episode I can't believe it's already 8 years ago that him and his wife had those unfortunate issues. Covington, I tell you what, is he going to fight Fabrizio Werdum? Absolutely not, unless he goes over to Bellator and Scott Coker decides that, hey, we're going to have an open weight Grand Prix. But people are talking about Colby, and he's a stud. He also went on the record talking about throwing some shade at John Jones. They were roommates in college, and he had some not so nice things to say about, the greatest light heavyweight champion that mixed martial arts has ever seen. It doesn't even matter what he says, but what I am saying, what he did is it's effective. He's on MMA Junkie Radio. He's with Gorgeous George and the boys. He's getting retweets on Twitter. He's getting followers. Chael Sonnen was the first guy to do it. Conor McGregor kind of ran with it. Now these other guys are just going to do the same thing.
He's in the forefront of everybody's mind now.
Correct. The only guy to do it George's way was Rory McDonald and Sage Northcutt. Oddly enough, they're all at a TriStar. That humble approach. Like, I'm going to be the classiest guy that this sport has ever seen. Then you got a little bit of the wild man stuff. The guys to come out of Jackson's, Donald Cerrone, John Jones, tough guys come out of Jackson's. And then, fighting's a culture and everyone brings their own little flavor to it. I think that Colby Covington is, look for him to get a spot on a pay-per-view card. I don't know if he's quite ready for the co-main yet, but I do think that he's going to be someone that the UFC tries to push. They're going to cash in on his recent notoriety. I think that there's a certain intelligence to what he's been doing.
There is too.
Yeah.
He took a huge risk too, calling the country of Brazil animals, calling Brazilians animals, and then.
Does that sound familiar to you, Jerry?
What am I missing?
A gangster from the mean streets of West Lynn, Oregon, Chael Sonnen, declared war on Brazil. And they sent him down there.
And then recently saying, God damn, I hate New York after choking out Wanderlei Silva. All right, say whatever you want to say.
All right, so we just talked about Colby Covington. I like Ulster Overeem over Francis Ngannou. I just think that Overeem's a really technical striker. Francis is as big as they come, and if he lands one, he's going to crush Overeem. So if I'm wrong on this one, look for Francis Ngannou to absolutely decimate Overeem. Have him do the Harlem Shake or the turn down for what dance, because we've seen Overeem get chinny in his last couple of fights. I like that I made Jerry laugh on that one. Edson Barboza versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. I'll tell you what, man, Edson has been the guy that every time he gets close to that UFC gold, he never finds a way to get over that hump. But we saw the likes of, I think it was Michael Johnson, land some effective striking on Khabib. And if Michael Johnson can do it, imagine what Edson Barboza can. So if the best Edson Barboza shows up possible, and let's just say Khabib is a little bit negatively impacted by his laundry list of recent injuries, I like Edson Barboza in this fight. I have a feeling that that's going to go against the grain. If Khabib winds up, and Khabib's going to get a takedown, no matter, unless Barboza knocks him out early. I'm going to go with the long shot on this one. I haven't even taken a look at the odds yet, so if Edson is the favorite, I'm sorry. I'm going to go with Alistair Overeem. I'm going to go with Edson Barboza, and both of those are pick'em fights because at 265 and under, anything can happen. I get it. Anything else that we're looking at? I got Cyborg Santos over Holly Holm just by veracity. I think that Holly Holm is the only person willing to step into the cage with Cyborg at this time. Germaine Durandame vacated her title, which I don't know enough about the woman to say anything intelligently, but I've never seen a fighter vacate a belt because they didn't want to fight somebody else. Especially, maybe if they were on the same team, if we saw Rory McDonald, get a crack at GSP 4 years ago, maybe we would have seen somebody move up or move down a weight class. In the world of MMA, I think that this is a time as good as it comes. I would love to see some concrete evidence of what Conor McGregor is going to do next. I would love to see Rose Namajunas get a little bit of the fanfare that she is so rightly deserved of. Damian Maia tell you what, man, it was fun to watch Damian make a comeback. Colby Covington made him look not like Damian Maia. So Damian Maia, my hat's off to you. The Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix, I don't know what you're going to expect. It is better than Kimbo Slice versus Dada 5000 and Kimbo Slice versus, was that Frank Shamrock or Ken Shamrock? Who did Kimbo fight? Which Shamrock brother?
Probably was Frank because Frank's younger.
Okay, it doesn't make a difference who he fought. But, we saw a couple of those spectacle fights. We saw Chael versus Wanderlei. We saw Chael versus Tito. And that stuff gets old pretty quick. We saw Tito versus Stephan Bonner. I do think that Matt Mitrione is a guy. He's a little bit older, but I think that he's a voice. I think he's a face. I think that he could generate some interest if you put the camera on him. I don't think that Wanderlei Silva is going to capture the hearts and the attention of the younger, newer fight fans that didn't get a chance to see him fight in Pride in the UFC. King Mo Lawal, I'm a big fan, but nobody really knows who he is outside of the guys who are living on the underground checking MMAHQ.com for the deal of the day. So anyone out there that watches us that's a true blue, tried and tested fan of the UFC, especially from its dark days, how cool is it to watch our sport become what it's become? You have moms rooting for George St. Pierre and, Ronda Rousey a couple of years back, and you have fighters sponsored by Reebok, and you have Showtime Pettis a couple of years ago on the cover of the Wheaties box, and you have Paige Van Zandt on Dancing with the Stars.
Cody Garbrandt doing Geico commercials.
Cody Garbrandt's on a Geico commercial?
Yeah.
No shit. No shit. You had Chuck Liddell doing car battery stuff. It's a great time for the sport, and we got to keep our hats off to the guys like an Ariel Helwani. He was doing this stuff for like AOL.com for free and for fun. He wouldn't even get press credentials at the UFC, and, people shit on him. I think he does a great job. He's an MMA journalist who did it when there was no money in it. He's rightfully earned his spot at the top of the hill known as mixed martial arts journalism. For the year to come, what do I like to see? We saw a phenomenal TJ. I think that him and Cody are going to treat us to a couple of dances. I wouldn't be surprised to see if those guys run it back more than once. Those two guys left it all in the cage. It was fun to watch. Anybody else that I have my eye out for in 2017 and the year to come? I think it's too early to jump the gun on the likes of a Mike Perry or a Colby Covington, but I would like to see Stipe fighting anybody soon.
I don't think so, but something that just came to my mind is Nate Diaz is in talks to fight somebody soon, and I would love to look at it.
Nate Diaz turned down a fight with Tyron Woodley, which I think is a good call because he was probably going to make about $600,000 to fight Tyron Woodley. I don't like his chances against Tyron.
I thought it was more of like a super fight. Excuse me, I thought it was more like a super fight.
It's not a super fight because...
No, but I thought it was something. I thought it wasn't Tyron Woodley.
Oh, that's the one that... But I did. I got it right. It was Tyron?
No. Look, I would... Yeah, before we wrap up, I really think we should make sure who is Nate. It's somewhere on Reddit or something. But it was probably Tyron Woodley.
That's the one who they offered him a fight versus Tyron.
Okay.
So... That's it for everything in the world of sports. Blake Shelton was voted sexiest man alive. Apparently nobody consulted Cody Garbrandt, Luke Rockhold. Who's the male model?
In the
Brian Callen's like in love with the guy.
I know. Who's the guy that's doing modeling?
Little short-haired guy.
It was Luke Rockhold was doing modeling. Sage Northcutt, I think, did a little bit of modeling. Look it up.
I am. UFC male model.
I think it just started too.
This is the first time I've ever been tired during this. Alan Jouban. How the fuck did I forget that?
Alan Joe.
So yeah, I'll tell you what. You see these guys wearing board shorts out there in the stands. If you've ever been to a UFC event live, there are some of the most beautiful women who show up. And although some of them show up for the jiu-jitsu, I'm sure they stay for the abs. So Blake Shelton, I have no idea how that happened. I would love to see you just. We should have like all the top male models in the world have like a walk-off a la Zoolander 2002 versus the best that the UFC has to offer. I'll put Misha Tate and Paige Van Zandt up against, nobody wants a lowercase L. We got the prettiest girls. We got the most studly guys. We've got the best fans. We've got the best sponsors. Our sport is live and active 52 weeks a year. We have Reddit. We have MMA Underground. We have MMA Junkie. We have MMA Heat. We have Karen Bryant. We have Ariel Helwani. We have UFC Tonight. We have Scott Coker over there trying to do big things in Bellator. And we got stars that we don't even know are stars yet. They're going to be on their way. 2017, I don't think we're going to see any paradigm jumps the way that we see with a Ronda Rousey or a Conor McGregor. But our legitimate, solidified fan base, like the way we've transcended from casual fans who tune in once or twice a month to watch a pay-per-view for the main event, we have people who are like tuning into the prelim cards. We have people who are watching things on Fight Pass. We have people who are watching Bellator. And, we're starting to get the coverage on ESPN that we've always clamored for. And I'll tell you what, man, the biggest thing to come to boxing was the UFC lightweight champion of the world. That's food for thought. Imagine if somebody said that 15 years ago.
The biggest pay-per-view in history.
Yeah, was going to come from the UFC over to their world of boxing. And I tell you what, Paulie Malignaggi, Floyd Mayweather, all those guys, I'm a fan of boxing. I love Costa Azul. I love Louis Collazo. I love Kermit Cintrone. Arturo Gatti was probably my favorite fighter that I ever got to see fight live. Julio Cesar Chavez is a fucking hero. But we haven't seen any of those guys since James Toney make their way over to our sport. So for Jerry, for Ray, Dr. Tron, the MMA guys, we should probably rename that because we got a lot of flack in the comments for calling ourselves the MMA guys.
Well, why don't we have people in the comments give us some suggestions?
Yeah, if you guys have a better name for us, feel free to just shoot it down there. Junkie in the douche, Dr. Tron and me, that'd be fucking great. Shark Teeth, thanks for the plug, saying that I should be on the JRE. I'm fucking tired tonight. I chugged a Monster and I had some tobacco, but I'm still strung out. That's it. I don't want to leave on a high note. Just going to end it here, awkwardly. Wait till Jerry turns off the camera.
We'll see you next time. All right, that was awesome, dude.
I was struggling tonight.
You did great, though. You did great. But yeah, I get a little tired. Probably not working out, yeah?
Yeah, I didn't eat either. I'm fasting right now.
Okay. Are you fasting?
Yeah.
Intermittent fasting?
That is correct. I am fucking exhausted, my man.
Do you want to get some chicken or do you want to go home?
I might swing by, say hi to the children, and then shoot home.